and fighting social dumping by means of public procurement. We are going to record the meeting, so you must have heard the message right now. As you know, I assume most of you are familiar with the GPP help desk, but in case it is the first time that you're joining our webinars, I would like to remind you that the GPP help desk is a service contract that was awarded by DG Environment in cooperation with DG Grow to eClay and Edel. And despite the name, this last edition of this contract is covering sustainable procurement. So we are dealing with green and social aspects. The webinar of today will focus on social aspects. I also would like to inform you that unfortunately I'm dealing with some serious health issues. So in case my energy is not as high as other times, please forgive me and take this into account. Some housekeeping rules before starting. We would like to ask you not to use the chat to ask questions to the speakers, but instead to connect to Slido. And now my colleague is going to show you the QR code. And in case the QR code doesn't work, you can go to slido.com and put hashtag GPPLdesk as a password. Okay. So we will start immediately with some questions. To you by Slido, because we would like to know who is joining this webinar. So Hulan, please show the first question. Yes. What kind of organizations are you representing? A contracting authority, an authority in charge of public procurement policy, a central purchasing body, a company contractor, a social partner, an NGO, a law firm, public procurement practitioner or legal expert, or a social economy enterprise. Okay, it seems that 42% are contracting authorities, 33 now. Yeah. Okay, we can move on to the second poll. So this is the word cloud. What word comes to your mind when you think of decent work and public procurement? Please put, very concise answers in just few words so we can see fair, collective agreement, fairness, fair play, honest pay, fair working conditions, ethical, accountability, professional, social clauses, transparent, ethical, discrimination free, opportunities, market, equity, trade unions, health and safety, equality, competition, sustainability, leverage, raw materials, responsibility, possibility of control, difficulty to monitor, equal conditions, due diligence, non-price criteria, fair treatment, influence price. Yes. It seems that the words on which there is more consensus is fair, transparency, and fairness. So thank you very much. And I will now move on with my presentation. Okay. Let me know if you can see it. Okay, good. So what I'm going to do now is to very briefly present you the findings of a study that was carried out last year, that was on behalf of the Employment Committee of the European Parliament, and the contractor was Fondazione Brodolini. And why I'm presenting it? It is because I was the scientific coordinator and main author. The findings from this study are based on desk research and the views of the stakeholders that were interviewed at EU level and in 5 member states. At EU level, we had an interview with Business Europe, EPSU, ETUC, Europa, SMEs United, then one representative from DG Grow and one from DG Employment, ICLEI, Public Procurement Analysis, which was our legal expert, and Social Services Europe. At member states level, so we covered 5 member states, and in each member state we had from 3 to 5 interviews, in some cases a bit more, to contracting authorities at all levels, social partners, and social economy enterprises. Okay. Now I'm going to summarize some key findings on the application of the horizontal social clause. Of course, the scope of the study was much broader, but this was an important point. Most level stakeholders share the opinion that the impact of the mandatory social clause has been more limited than what was expected. This is I would say all trade unions agree on this. In the case of labor-intensive sectors, there is also an agreement between employers and the trade unions. But this was also shared by the legal expert. Article 18.2 of the directive provides that member states shall take appropriate measures to ensure that in the performance of public contracts, economic operators comply with mandatory legislation. And there was more or less consensus, including from the legal expert, saying that appropriate measures is vague. And this is also one of the reasons why you will see today from the good practices that we are going to present that the horizontal social clause has been really implemented very differently across member states. And another point was that there is a lack of clarity about which authority should enforce this provision. Okay. An important point that was raised by SMEs United is that most of the complaints SMEs associations receive from companies are related to the non-respect of the mandatory social clause because contracting authorities choose basically offers on the basis of the lowest price or cost, and they do not necessarily check if they comply with the mandatory legislation or with collective agreements. So the predominant use of the lowest price or cost as a word criterion by contracting authority seems to be the main issue, especially in tenders concerning labor-intensive services. Another point that was raised is that ILO Convention 94, which stipulates that tenders may not apply less favorable conditions of employment than those in force at the local level, is not mentioned in the directive. Jurisprudence has clarified that the horizontal social clause applies even when a contracting authority awards the contract on the basis of the cheapest price. If there is a universally or otherwise applicable collective agreement in a sector, it applies and should be respected and enforced. The issue is when, and this is really a gray area, when there is no applicable collective agreement, but a contracting authority would like to require economic operators to engage in collective bargaining and to apply collective bargained labor standards. Two words about the notion of applicable collective agreement. Trade unions argue that the definition of what is an applicable collective agreement cannot be limited to collective agreements that are declared universally applicable, but rather the question of applicability largely depends on national law and practice. Thus, due regard needs to be given to the specificities of national labor market models and industrial relation systems, which are very, very different across member states. As is illustrated by the 2018 Posting of Workers Directive, the definition of applicable collective agreements covers not only those declared universally applicable, but in the absence or in addition to such agreements, also those generally applicable to all similar undertakings in the geographical area and in the profession or industry concerned, and or those concluded by the most representative employers and organizations. The Public Procurement Directive makes reference to the previous version of the Posting of Workers Directive in recital 37, but not to the Posting of Workers Directive, which is now in force. Some conclusions. So there is the main grain area in the application of the mandatory social clause is really concerning the promotion of collective agreements. And in particular, it is said when there is no applicable collective agreement. This is a very, very complex matter. And even in view of reopening the negotiations for a new directive, it is recommended that public procurement experts work in collaboration with experts in industrial relations. Because if everything is left only to public procurement experts, they would not necessarily know all the complex matter in industrial relations. And of course, the experts in industrial relations may not be fully expert in public procurement. So it's really important that there is a collaboration here. And another suggestion is that perhaps a different approach could be taken for labor-intensive services, because the main issue seems to be related to these services. So, thank you very much. And now I would like to give the floor to Anna Lupi. Anna Lupi is a Legal and Policy Officer at DG Grow, and she's been working there for 9 years. She's in charge of the Commission Policy on Sustainable Public Procurement, and she coordinates awareness raising and dissemination initiatives on the topic and the creation of support tools for public buyers. She has dealt with a number of EU member states as a desk officer previously. Anna, the floor is yours.
The floor is to you, please.
Anna, are you around? If so, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear but not see you.
Okay, I will try to. I have some connection issues, so I'm not sure I can, but I will try to share my presentation. I don't think you can see it, right?
Oh, Anna, we cannot see it until now because also your screen is not visible, or you are not visible.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think I can share the presentation, but I can run you through a few of the things that I wanted to tell you in any case, because Valentina already mentioned some of them. So first of all, thank you all for being here.
And if you want, I think we can share the presentation as a
That
technical
would be great.
support. Yes. So Delfina, can you please share Anna's presentation?
Valentina, so sorry, but I don't know if I have that one. I have yours. Sorry about
I sent it.
Okay.
I sent it yesterday.
It's okay. Otherwise, I mean, it's largely discussing things that you already mentioned, Valentina. So maybe I can just go ahead like this. So thank you all for being there. I think today's topic is very important, as Valentina already mentioned. There's a reform of the public procurement directives on the horizon. So this will probably be something that we will discuss in the next couple of years from now. I just wanted to mention a couple of things that relate also to what Valentina was explaining before, in particular the content of Article 18 of the Public Procurement Directive, but there's also a similar provision in the Utilities Directive, which is called the Horizontal Social Clause, which basically requires member states to take appropriate measures to ensure that when a public contract is performed, economic operators comply with social and labor law obligations. And the provision is very specific in indicating that the obligations are the obligations which stem from EU national and international law. When we talk about international law, of course, it's mainly the ILO core conventions, which are also mentioned in the directive in Annex 10, and the obligations also stem from the law. And this is the case, I know, for some member states, but also collective agreements. And both, let's say, all the national provisions that have to be applied in this case, so all the applicable obligations have to be in compliance with EU law. But more specifically, in the recitals of the directives, there is a reference to posted workers rules and avoiding discrimination of operators from different member states. Of course, the directives take a very internal market related approach to regulating, of course, the issue of social and labor obligations within the context of public procurement. So one of the, let's say, the limits to which social and labor standards you can apply in procurement is, of course, the non-discrimination of operators coming from different member states, and this is where the Posted Workers Directive, let's say, establish the fundamental standards of reference in this case. Valentina also mentioned that this formulation of the provision is fairly vague. It talks about taking appropriate measures, and this was to a certain extent thought as necessary because, of course, as also Valentina mentioned, every different member state in the EU has very different a very different culture or tradition in terms of organizing social and labor law. And so the idea was to leave, let's say, as much freedom to member state authorities as possible to see how to apply this horizontal clause. One important thing to remember in this context is that the appropriate measures are to a certain extent also included in the directives themselves, in the sense that the directives already include quite a few provisions that are targeted towards ensuring compliance with Article 18 and with applicable social and labor obligations. And these are, for example, the exclusion grounds. There are some specific, there is one specific exclusion ground that can be applied in order to safeguard compliance with the social and labor horizontal clause. There is a possibility, for instance, also to avoid awarding a contract to based on the bid that is the most economically advantageous when the bid itself does not comply with social and labor law obligations. And also there are provisions on abnormally low tenders. So basically tenders that are that include an offer in price which is so low that require additional, let's say, questioning and investigation from the contracting authorities in order to determine whether the price is not low because some obligations have not been complied with, and the directives explicitly mention social and labor obligations as described in Article 18 as one of the reasons to which are basically just at the basis of not being able to offer, let's say, a fair price. Another important tool is, of course, the use of contract clauses, and we have seen this. This is already something that a lot of contracting authorities do, imposing basically contractual obligations on economic operators to perform the contract in line with certain local labor rules. And of course, these are clauses also that have to be in line with EU legislation, and in particular with the posted workers rules. But then when it comes to appropriate measures, of course, there can be a whole range of national or local measures that can be taken, and that are mostly that I mostly imagine refer to techniques and methods that are not strictly related to the specific procurement procedure, like the intervention of labor inspectorates, cooperation of labor authorities with public buyers. We've seen in some cases contracting authorities create task forces to employ to monitor employment in certain risky sectors where they procure a lot of services or works. So this is, of course, left to the choice of the single contracting authority or of the national authorities. One more thing that I wanted to mention in the context of course, social dumping in public procurement is the use of award criteria. I think already Valentina mentioned this briefly, but there is no obligation under the directives, in fact, to award the contract on the basis of price only criteria. there are specific techniques that can be used on the basis of the provisions of the directives. But let's say that we are growing, at least in the Commission, increasingly wary of price-only awards. This is something that some of you may know has already been highlighted by the European Court of Auditors, but there's an increasing prevalence of over-reliance on price for awarding public contracts across the EU. It's a phenomenon that that is fairly well documented by now. And so we are starting really to wonder what is the relationship between relying on price in the award of contract, especially in certain sectors, and the effect that this has on the working conditions of the staff that performs the contract, and in particular, of course, wages. I mean, there are starting to be some evidence about some effects on pressure on wages, and of course this reflects also on the quality of the performance of the contracts as delivered to the citizens. I will just finish by saying that I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. We have in the Commission a public buyers community platform that we have created. It's accessible for everyone. Anyone can become a member and publish news and resources on the platform. But mainly this platform hosts community of buyers, of public buyers from across the EU. And we basically support them in devising strategies and new techniques in order to facilitate them in the purchase of sustainable goods, services, and works. I will leave you the link so that you can have a look, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter in order to have the latest news. We will also publicize some of the progress in view of the reform of the public procurement directives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna. I invite participants, if you have any question to Anna, to please put it in Slido. And to facilitate also our task, it would be great if you could also specify to whom your question is addressed to. I will now pass on to the presentation of good practices from member states. We will start from Belgium, where we're going to have two presentations. First of all, from the federal level, and secondly, from the region of Flanders. The first speaker is Thomas Munoz Caballero. He's an expert in knowledge management at the Social Information and Investigation Service, an entity that coordinates the action of Belgian inspectorates, both internally and internationally. His areas of expertise include legal and international affairs. Thomas, the word is yours.
Yes, thank you for having me. I will just quickly share my screen and the presentation. I believe you should be able to see it. So basically, I will be speaking about what Belgium does for fighting social dumping in public procurement contracts. mainly from the perspective of the social inspectorates, and also, since I represent the federal level, I will give a brief overview of the institutional context. So, institutional framework, it has to be noted that in Belgium, we have a strong tradition of social dialogue. Unfortunately, fighting social dumping has been found to be a key area of mutual interest, both for workers and for employers. For workers, obviously, social dumping is detrimental to their rights, but also for employers, because companies in Belgium have some competitive advantages, such as highly skilled workers, high quality products, and innovation. And the unfair competition, which is a consequence of social dumping, can also be detrimental to employers. And since we have that consensus between employers and workers, it has been possible to implement some measures to counter social dumping in public procurement. Here you have a list of key players in the field. I will insist mainly on the CNT, the Conseil National du Travail, which is a bipartite advisory body. Bipartite stands for employers and workers. And it highlighted the need for better monitoring of social clauses in public contracts. And their call has been heard by legislators, by the Belgian policymakers. We didn't wait for the implementation of European regulations or directives. There is a strong incentive that comes directly from the social dialogue. Then we have a very elaborated legal framework. I will skip this slide because I believe my colleague Ida Van Neck, she will speak after me and she will give more detail about this. But the main point is that public procurement law is a very complex and technical field, but also social criminal law, which is a major deterrent against social dumping, is also very complex and technical. And that is why there is a necessity of collaboration between the actors of both fields. That is, in the first place, contracting authorities and inspectorates. And that is the main point of my presentation. It's the collaboration between contracting authorities and inspectorates. Because of course, contracting authorities, they have a significant role to make sure that the contractor respects social legislation. But in reality, it's sometimes very hard to detect social dumping, to detect fraud. Very often, you need the trained eye of a social inspector, which is trained specifically on that purpose, because fraudsters, they are smart and they have many fraud tactics, like submitting false documents, using very complex subcontracting schemes, or circumventing EU regulation on posting. And this makes it very complex for a contracting authority to exert its control. And that is why we have some initiatives to improve the cooperation between contracting authorities and inspectorates. I will just briefly talk about a few of these. We have the SIIS, the Social Information and Investigation Service, the cooperation protocols, the point of contact for fair competition, and also plans for fair competition. So the SIIS, the Social Information and Investigation Service, what is it? It is an umbrella organization which coordinates the many inspectorates. In Belgium, I believe it's also the case in other member states, we have a lot of inspectorates. We have one for social security, for labor law, for self-employees, unemployment benefits, and many others. And this fragmentation makes it impossible to create a structural cooperation between inspectorates and other actors. So that is why we are trying to improve a centralized approach in order to better collaborate with external partners that can be with inspectorates from other member states, with the European Labour Authority, our judicial authorities, but also more recently with contracting authorities. And that is how we now are able to oversee direct controls in public contracts using cooperation protocols. Cooperation protocols between the contracting authorities and the SIIS and inspectorates, basically it allows us to receive listings of ongoing construction sites, and then these listings are discussed among the inspectorates, and we set control objectives. We go and we investigate. And this approach has some advantages. It's very good for the inspectorates because we know where to go investigate. And also it gives us, an incentive, a motivation to specifically target public construction sites. And also for the contracting authorities, it is interesting. They are not directly informed of the results of the inspection, but the fact that we go there, investigate, and impose sanction, it contributes to a major cleanup of the bad players in the field, which is an advantage for the contracting authorities. Here you can see some numbers about the controls implemented in public construction sites. You also see positivity rate. You can see that each time that we go investigate in a public contract, we very often see fraud, we see social dumping, and often this leads to sanctions. We also have sanctions including the exclusion of an operator to participate further to any public procurement for a period of 5 years. So it is a very useful initiative. Another initiative is the point of contact for fair competition. As you said earlier, Anna, we have an obligation for contracting authority to reject abnormally low bids. But in Belgium, we go a step further, and the contracting authority has an obligation to submit to the SIIS a notification. Then we see that there is here suspicion of fraud. We go investigate, and it may lead to sanction, contributing to the cleanup of the bad actors. The plans for fair competition, I realize that the time is nearly up, so I will skip this one. And also I wanted to give a few words about subcontracting chains, because this is a topic of concern, both for contracting authorities and for inspectorates, because the complexity of subcontracting chains makes it very complicated to see who bears the responsibility for the obligation of the employer towards the worker or the society, the social security, for instance. So there are many legislative initiatives to counter the complexity of subcontracting chains. You have that in other member states. There are limitations in the numbers of subcontracting you can implement. There is a prohibition of the complete subcontracting of a contract. This is not new. What is more recent and more specific is that in Belgium, we introduced in the social criminal code very recently a new infringement, which is the abuse of subcontracting chains. That means that when a subcontractor does not comply with the obligation related to the limitation of subcontracting chains, it is in itself a criminal offense. So the inspector doesn't need to prove that there was other kind of fraud. The simple fact that the contractor subcontracted too much can be considered as a criminal offense and can be imposed a sanction, including the interdiction to participate to public procurement. So I believe this is a very useful initiative. It is very recent, May 2024. I'm not sure that is already implemented in practical, but we will see maybe later how this evolves. So basically, given the time allocated, This is a few of the initiatives that I wanted to point out regarding Belgium, and that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for this very comprehensive presentation, despite the time that was allocated, which was not a lot. So thank you very much. I invite participants to put in Slido questions to Thomas. And now I will move to the second speaker, Ida van Neck. Ida works as a legal officer for the central purchasing body of the Agency for Facility Operations of the Government of Flanders. She provides legal support in public procurement matters with a special interest in its social aspects. So Ida, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction. I will just find my slides. I think you should all be able to see that. So I will be talking a bit about some guidance and practices that we suggest in preventing social dumping in public procurement from the perspective of the regional government of Flanders. Before I do that, I feel like I should very briefly give some context about the state structure in Belgium, just to set the scene. So Belgium is a federal state. It means the competences are divided between a federal level and a regional level. This is a very simplified version, but these are exclusive competences. So they are at one of the levels. So public procurement legislation is a federal competence. So all the legislation exists at the federal level, and we as a regional government just have to follow it essentially. We can't make our own rules in this regard. So the directive has been transposed into various legislative acts that you can see. It's been quite faithfully transposed. There's a lot of legislation. And as Thomas has explained a bit, labor and social law is a bit of a mixed picture. Some of it is at the federal level, some of it is at the regional level. And this also allows me to just introduce myself a bit quickly. So I work for the central purchasing body of the Agency for Facility Operations of the Government of Flanders. So this is an agency that provides facilities to the Flemish administration. As a central purchasing body, we conclude framework agreements for commonly used goods and services. So anything from cars to consultancy to sandwiches we buy. And this means that we have also amassed a little bit of expertise in the matter of public procurement. So in that role, we also have a part of our legal team that provides legal advice and public procurement to the rest of the organization of the Flemish administration. And in general, we also provide support and information regarding public procurement and the integration of certain strategic objectives into public procurement, of which the fight against social dumping is one of these objectives, of course. And in that role, we have published a guide on preventing social dumping in public procurements. So this is the second version of this guide, and it has as an explicit goal to be a kind of tool for contracting authorities on how to deal with social dumping. So the guide is publicly available. It's not limited to our organization, so it's also definitely meant for local authorities, for example. And in the redaction of this guide, we've had input from different stakeholders, so other contracting authorities, but also from the field, some sectoral organizations. And the way, just purely practically, how we have conceived this guide is in two big sections. So a section that gives an overview of just existing obligations and possibilities in the realm of fighting social dumping, because already this can be quite a lot for contracting authorities to just get a view of. So this just gives an overview of everything they need to know. And then we have a different section of the guide that provides standard clauses that then contracting authorities can use in their own tender documents. And then all of this is summarized in a handy checklist for every step of the procurement procedure, like what measures can be taken to prevent social dumping. So to go a bit more into detail on what we see as the main matters in public procurement law that are relevant. So of course, we've already talked about some of these today. So for example, choice of award criteria has already been mentioned as an important subject. So not just lowest price, but we always try to suggest using best price quality ratio. Tomas is also, it's already been mentioned, excluding bids that do not comply with obligations in the field of environmental, social, and labor law. Of course, the importance of exclusion grounds. So to really check, has this tender been convicted of any things such as child labor, other forms of trafficking. So this is all in the directive, of course. Tomas has also mentioned the importance of subcontracting. This is also something we do really try to emphasize in the guides. The importance of just getting a view of what the subcontracting chain looks like as a contracting authority, especially in these sectors that are vulnerable to social and labor abuses. So these have their own stricter regime in the Belgian legislation. And then also, as has also already been mentioned as well, checking abnormally low tenders. So this process is also quite formalized in the Belgian legislation, and part of this verification of a low tender does include asking the tenderer to justify his prices along with his, has he done all his social obligations. So this is all pretty formalized already in the legislation. So then in broader labor law, there's also, of course, some aspects relevant for contracting authorities. So there are various types of joint and several liabilities in subcontracting chains that are very relevant for contracting authorities, because if they don't follow the right steps, they might be held liable. So these are liabilities for non-payment of wages, for example, things like that. And then we also suggest some specific actions on the construction sites that need to be taken. Some of these suggest checking of documents are also legal obligations. For example, making sure that posted workers have all the documentation there. But then we also suggest some very practical things, such as language requirements in the tender documents, just to make sure that the people in charge at the construction sites can, for example, actually communicate effectively with the contracting authority. And then lastly, of course, also we advise to pay sufficient attention to requirements regarding labor safety, both in the documents itself, but and also on the construction sites itself. Then I would say the main takeaways from the guides are that, at least within the context of Belgium, I think the framework of public procurement law actually already provides many avenues in fighting social dumping. So in that respect, I don't think it's necessary to kind of reinvent the wheel here. I think there are a lot of tools already, but we just need to use them. So that is also why we really emphasize that preventing social dumping needs to be a focus throughout the whole procurement procedure. So at the beginning, drafting the documents, incorporating the right clauses, that is one aspect. But then also, of course, it's important to actually follow up during the performance of the contract, do the necessary checks. And this is, for example, also something we do in our cleaning or security contracts. We really follow up these contracts very closely during the performance, keep an eye on subcontractors, sometimes reject subcontractors that are not, on the level. And then lastly, we try to raise awareness on when to contact social inspection services. So in some cases, it is actually an obligation, but there are also certain situations where something can just seem a bit suspicious. So in that sense, we also really try to make people aware there are people you can contact, and it is important to do that. So then some other initiatives. So Thomas has already explained the cooperation protocol. We also have one with the SIIS, so we provide them with some information regarding our contracts, and we do also try to organize seminars on what are good practices. There's new legislation, for example, the social criminal code in Belgium has changed, so we will try to organize some sessions on that. And then lastly, we're also in something, a bit more broad, but we're also in the Electronics Watch affiliate. So that is an organization that looks at labor rights within the supply chain, specifically in the electronics sector. So that was my motion. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ida. And now we will move to Germany. Here we're going to have two speakers. The first speaker is Matthias Maucher. He's an independent expert who is currently serving as a public procurement expert in the European Commission. We buy social use service contract on a socially responsible public procurement. We invited him because he was the author, he contributed to the study, the European Parliament study, and he was the author of the chapters on Germany and Sweden. Matthias, in parallel, is also the policy and project coordinator of Social Services Europe. In the last more than 15 years, he has worked for the different EU-level NGO networks and one EU-level multi-sectoral trade union organization. In these jobs, and more recently also as a researcher, he has worked regularly on questions related to public procurement in the field of healthcare and social services, and in the last decade, intensively on SRPP. Matthias, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Valentina. I will share my slides. There are only two. You see them, I hope now. Okay. Thank you. So I will talk about the regulatory and the legal framework in Germany, and we are in another federal state like Belgium. So some words on Germany on the topic of today, decent work, social clauses. So the transposition took place of the European Directive in 2016, basically also rather loyal to all relevant features to promote socially responsible public procurement, including the horizontal social clause, but also, for example, reserved contracts, markets, or the use of the most economically advantageous tender. And here you see the German legislation against the restriction of competition that helped to transpose the legislation, and it sets a clear obligation on the economic operators to pay taxes, other fees, contribution to social security, logically to observe the labor law, obligations with regarding, as in Belgium, health and safety at the workplace, and also to grant at least the minimum level of working conditions as stated in a Minimum Wage Act or in the revised Posting of Workers Directive that Valentina also already referred to. And that means logically, as a result, that there is the obligation to pay at least minimum hourly wages that are sector-based or branch-based, and also the linked advantages like overtime pay or paid leave or increased rates and on the weekend and Sunday. There is another element in German legislation from 2023. As you see, it's on due diligence, and it's basically in the supply chain logic, so to enforce compliance with human rights provisions, logically including the ILO core labor standards, and creating reporting obligations for enterprises. And that means that they should be enforceable down the supply chain. Lastly, on Germany, there are developments to get a sort of federal legislation on the compliance with collective agreements. It was announced in the coalition agreement. There is a proposal from the relevant Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, but it has not been enacted, and we don't think it will be enacted in the next year until the end of the legislative mandate, because the Liberal Democratic Party is not in favor. Whereas on 14 of the 16 states, the Bundesländer, there is legislation on this, on compliance with collective agreements, and advanced legislations are only in 3, in Berlin, Saarland, and Thüringen. So now let's zoom in to Berlin before I give the floor to Juliane Kühnerich for the concrete example. So you also see that here state public procurement legislation sets out, so that's the regional for the state, Berlin is a state and a city, but here we talk about the state level, sets out ecological, social, and gender equality objectives in public procurement as part of a broader sustainability strategy that includes the compliance with the pay conditions in the prevailing sectoral or branch collective agreement. They also have obviously to be passed down and are binding for the subcontractors. And this is defined as a legitimate social clause and as a contract performance clause. And you see below another example, what you could do there are minimum employment rates or shares of women, so gender equality related issues. There is a register of applicable collective agreements. They are based on the CPV codes. And there is, last year was info for around 150 branches. And so there is a reference via the CPV codes to the relevant branch. I forgot your sectoral branch or enterprise specific collective agreement that applies. There is logically a requirement also to pay the minimum wage. You see the current amount per hour. And all the other related wage-related advantages that I mentioned. And then there is, interestingly, as one of the success factors for Berlin, we saw that there is a support structure is built up. There is guidance, training of the those that work in the contracting authorities, but also contact points providing targeted advice. And Juliane Kühnrich will talk about this one regarding to fair procurement. And that's obviously a tool for organizational change in the enterprises. And finally, not to forget, I think that links to the Belgian presentations, there is a control architecture to monitor compliance with ecological, social, and gender equality clauses. And that has also been said, and that means the contracting authorities do their control, but also the central unit of the relevant administration and ministry for economy and other issues that is dealing with this. I stop here because that was only the legal and regulatory framework for Germany, and now we can zoom in on Berlin with Juliane Kühnrich.
Thank you very much, Matthias. And now I will give the floor to Juliane Ulrich. Since October 2020, Juliane has been the project manager of the Competence Center for Fair Procurement in Berlin. Their goal is to support contracting authorities in Berlin in implementing SRPP. The Competence Center provides recommendations and assessment of evidence for sensitive product groups. It advises on tenders and supports, for example, in conducting market and bidder dialogues, and provides training on SRPP. Before joining the Competence Center, Juliane worked in the field of fair trade and fair procurement for other organizations, such as the NGO World Economy, Ecology and Development, and GPA, the Fair Trade Company. Juliane, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation to introduce a little bit a competence center, and I'm glad that I can tell you a little bit about the implementation of the compliance with the international recognized labor and human rights standards of the ILO in Berlin. So I share the slides. Yes, you already mentioned it. The Competence Center for Public Procurement was established in October 2020, and our aim is to support public contracting authorities in implementing the legal requirements for compliance with the ILO core conventional standards. Yes, we work on behalf of the Department of Economic Affairs, Energy and Enterprise in Berlin, and we are funded with budget funds of the state of Berlin, but we are based at Engagement Global. This is a non-profit limited liability company to support development initiatives in Germany. We are quite a small team of 2 persons at the moment. So yes, what do we do? How does the company center support public administration employees? I want to speak a little bit about our assistance and support we give. Yes, in order to provide public clients with the best possible support, one focus of our work is on training on socially responsible procurement. And 3 times a year, we offer a basic course on that topic. And another focus is on concrete support in market research. Often the public contracting authorities do not have the time for time-consuming market research or for organizing bidder dialogues, and so that's why we take on these tasks if we receive specific requests from awarding bodies. And so far we carried out a bidder dialogue 1 a year. In the last years, our focus at bidder dialogues were procurement of fair textiles and also in cooperation between Brandenburg. And in the field of textiles, we work, for example, a lot with the fire department in Berlin, which is very committed to the topic of sustainable procurement. Another offer from us is advice on tenders. So we support the formulation of tender texts and the anchoring of social criteria. Fortunately, we can do this with the support of a public procurement lawyer. And last but not least, we offer further assistance through our guide for small scale awards, which provides a lot of information about labels. So we were always asked about this theme, and this is one of the one of the most questions we get, how we can assess the labels public procurers get. Yeah, Matthias was spoken about the legal framework, and here's just a short note to that. The obligation to take social and ecological criteria into account in tenders has been anchored in Berlin already since 2012 in the Berlin Tendering and Procurement Act. But until 2020, until the reform of the Public Procurement Act, there was only concrete assistance for the consideration of ecological criteria. So there was a lack in the implementation of social criteria, and there were no concrete requirements for implementation of the ILO core labor standards. And the consequence of this was that companies filled out self-declarations. And this changed with the reform of 22, and the social criteria were strengthened, and the Department of Economic Affairs in Berlin was given a basis for authorization in the Tendering and Procurement Act to draw up an implementation regulation for compliance with the ILO core labor standards that self-declarations are no longer accepted as proof. Yeah, how are the public contracting authorities in building being supported in concrete terms in the implementation? So since November last year, there are the implementation regulation, and this regulation regulates for which product groups concrete evidence is to be requested. Then it clarifies how the evidence is to be provided and at what time it has to be submitted. And the regulations specify groups of goods for which a violation of internationally recognized standards is likely. So yeah, currently for 7 products, we have the sheets for the public authority, public contracting authorities, and for these product groups, there is proof of compliance with the ILO labor standards, and there is also a market for it. And yeah, to ensure that public contracting authorities do not have to research themselves which evidence is suitable, the product sheets specify which evidence is accepted. For tenders that contain sensitive products, the product sheets must apply. And here on the slide, you see the sensitive products which are in this regulation. So there are 9 sensitive products. These groups are workwear, shoes, leather, flat linen, like towels or bed linen, natural stones, wood, construction materials, food, the IT hardware, sport ball, and toys. And the product sheets are intended to simplify the socially responsible procurement and made it as easy as possible for public contract authorities to demand social criteria for the protection of labor standards. And here you can see how the product sheet is structured. So it's a part of this to create a standard for this theme. And the most important thing is the concrete named evidence. Here you see it for the textiles. Yeah, if bidders are unable to provide any of the mentioned certificates, they always have the option to submit an equivalent proof. And here on the slide, you can see the icons for the product groups for which there is already a product sheet available. It means that for these groups, there are labels on the market.
Juliana, sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you, but we're really running out of
Oh,
time. Can you please
Yeah.
move to the conclusions?
Yeah, I just
Thank
want to address a very helpful online tool for public contracting authorities in German-speaking countries. It's the Sustainable Compass. This is an internet platform with many practical examples and informations on socially responsible procurement. This Compass is a cooperation project between Engagement Global and the Society for International Cooperation, GIZ. And this is very useful because there you have also texts for tenders, for example. Yes, and finally, I would like to show you just an overview of competence centers at state level in Germany. So at state level, we have 5 at the moment and 1 at federal level. And these centers support the public authorities in implementing the sustainable procurement. Yeah. And so they have capacities for various activities that take more time than normally is in the everyday procurement. yeah, such as market researchers, organization of bitter dialogues, or others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliane. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, Professor Lisa De Rigatti is not able to join, so I will go through her presentation very quickly. Okay, let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. So, there was a research project, Procure Fair, identification and analysis of experimentations. Sorry. Of buying decent work in 6 European countries, with a focus on the working conditions in contracted out cleaning and security service. The focus goes on the political dynamics of SRPP, under which conditions do SRPP practice emerge, who are the actors that play a role in these processes. I do not know, but I have issues with moving the slides. It takes time. I don't know if someone from the technical team can help me.
Valentina, do you want me to share the screen?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'm really sorry for all these
No worries.
issues. Okay. Maybe if you can go to the previous one. Okay. In the country report for Italy, 3 case studies were analyzed of local, meaning regional or provincial, B or tripartite agreements, protocols on working conditions in public procurement. So the most advanced system to ensure, I would say, not socially responsible public procurement in Italy, but mainly really the respect of the horizontal social clause. We can find in the regional law of Tuscany, where there is a permanent technical table and also a memorandum of understanding. And in Tuscany, there is a system which is tripartite. So it really involves employers and trade unions. The second case is a law of the autonomous province of Trento. The autonomous province of Trento has a special, let's say, a special regime in the Italian legislation. Here they mainly have a collaboration with the trade unions, but they are also now setting up an internal office to carry out inspections on site. And then there is the legality and procurement protocol of Emilia-Romagna region. The next one. Can you move? Okay. It's important to highlight that there has been, in Italy, there has been a revision of the Code of Public Contracts in 2023. And a lot of changes have been made to the legislation. For example, the new code indicates that the cost-effectiveness criteria in the selection of the offers can be subordinated to social criteria. And in the case of labor-intensive services, the exclusive price or cost consideration cannot be applied. The code also mandates the introduction of labor clauses for ensuring employment stability in labor-intensive service. And this is, let's say, a provision that cannot be, maybe there are other member states, in Spain, for example, but it's a provision which is very peculiar to the Italian legal framework. There is an obligation for the contractor to take over the service to ensure employment levels by hiring the personnel already employed by the outgoing contractor. This really applies only to labor-intensive services. The code also mandates the application to the workers involved in the terms and conditions of employment set in the collective agreement signed by the most representative social partners for the sector. Next one. So, content of the protocols, substantive regulation, so employment continuity clauses, labor clauses. So I've just said indication of the reference collective agreement for the activities carried out in the contract, and also definition of the criteria for awarding tenders. Effective application of the principle of the most economically advantageous offer by using criteria that go beyond price. Procedural regulation, establishment of procedures for the standing involvement of trade unions and where possible also employers in the procurement process. There is an ex-ante control of call for tenders to verify they do not contain elements that could negatively impact working conditions. And there is also an ex post control on the implementation execution of the provision during the execution of the service. I would say that these best practices that have been highlighted are a bit scattered, no? In the sense that these are the free good practices that can be found. So you shouldn't think that in all other regions or provinces there is something similar. Next one, strengths. Substantive elements, labor clauses, indication of the national collective agreement to be applied. Procedural elements, institutionalization of preventive involvement for trade unions, advanced bargaining, allows agreements to be translated on the ground and guarantee their effective implementation. The next one, limits, need to guarantee their effectiveness through use by local actors. The risk is that the labor clauses and union involvement procedures envisaged in the protocols remain paper tigers. Limited financial resources allocated by contracting authorities in call for tenders as a stringent constraint. Compliance with legal regulations at EU level and Italian level as a constraint for the introduction of the most stringent elements. Social clauses considered compatible only if not absolute, or if they allow a non-automatic balancing with the autonomous organizational and entrepreneurial choices of the new contractor. There is legal uncertainty on the compatibility of a strict indication of the reference of the national collective agreement with the principle of freedom of choice of the collective agreement. The new code on public contracts only partially clarifies this issue. And as I said, this is a limited diffusion because we could find only 3 good practices. So thank you very much. And now I would say we can go to the questions. So Ulen, if you can show the questions that we have received. Okay. What I also propose is that we will not be able to go through all the questions. So as we did in the webinar in December, we will address some of them now. But for the remaining, we will contact the speakers and send the responses in writing after the webinar. Dear Anna, it seems that the current plan to revise the directive doesn't have a social angle. Do you have any info of whether social issues will be covered? Then there is another one to Anna. Regarding the revision of the directive, where does the Council conclusions calling for a more in-depth study fit into this? Yeah, I would say these two questions are for you.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I can reply to them at the same time, saying that it's true that we don't know a whole lot in general about the revision of the directives. All that we know, including in the Commission, is what you can find in the political guidelines for the next mandate that have been published by von der Leyen. So, and this is also because we are in a little bit of a political void at the moment. You know, we are also waiting for the new mandate of the Commission to start. So the topics that you find mentioned in the guidelines are mainly related to environmental sustainability, simplification, preference for EU products. But personally, I think that the issue of strategic procurement, and not just the environmental aspects, but also the social aspects, will be very much part of the discussions for the revision of the directives, not only because there are several stakeholders in the private sector and in civil society that are raising different issues, some of which we have discussed today, but it goes beyond that. But also because there are some member states in the EU who are growing more and more interested in some of the social aspects, and notably those that are related to the application of labor legislation. So I think there will be an angle to these social issues, but of course I cannot give you any guarantee because all the political work still has to come. And regarding the in-depth analysis, yes, it's very much related also to the preparation of this revision. We expect that that we will not immediately jump into the discussing the different options and the content of the revision. It will still be quite a bit of time before we get into that. And the next step that which we are already preparing is an evaluation of the current public procurement directives, which will be done according to Commission standards. So there's a specific structure to this evaluation, but this will give us the opportunity to carry out the in-depth analysis that was also requested in the council conclusions. So we will examine a little bit the let's say the state of play of the directives, their effectiveness, their efficiency, their relevance to the current context, and also what they brought in terms of EU added value. And we have in this context also launched a selection procedure for stakeholders to join our expert group of stakeholders. Basically, we are renewing the composition of this stakeholders group. I can also post a link to this selection procedure, which ends next week. And we expect that this working group will assist us on top of all other interested stakeholders, among which for sure the member states. It will help us throughout this long process towards the revision of the directives, basically.
Thank you very much, Anna. And now I would move to questions to Thomas. And Hulen, can you please scroll down? Yes. Cooperation protocols can fight social dumping when it comes to procure works and services, but not goods, especially if produced abroad. Is this right? And the second question was, what's the penalty amount imposed on the company for social dumping that you discover?
Okay, so let's start by this second questions. Really, the amount of the penalty, it really depends on the type of infringement. Social dumping can concern many different infringements. You can have undeclared work. You can have employer paying below the minimum wage. This is also an infringement. And you can have illegal or dangerous working conditions. And in all these cases, depending on the severity, you will have a different level of sanction. We have 4 levels of sanction in our social criminal code. But if you want to know the maximum level, last time I checked, we are talking about 24,000 euros. But please note that it can be multiplied by the number of workers concerned by the fraud. So if you have 100 workers, you can multiply the maximum sanction by the number of workers. And also the money sanction is in addition to the obligation to regularize. For instance, if you have undeclared worker, it's also a case of social dumping. The employer has to reimburse all social contribution that should have been paid in addition to the financial sanction. Then we have also prison sanctions for for some cases, and other sanctions like closure of the enterprise or professional interdictions. And also recently, and reflecting on the topic of this webinar, is the exclusion from participating to public procurement procedures. That is for the question about the amount of the sanctions. Regarding the cooperation protocol, so it was asked whether this also includes goods, if goods are especially produced abroad. I must admit that for the moment, the cooperation protocols between the contracting authorities and the inspectorates via the SIIS, they only concern public construction sites. So it is not about goods, it is only about construction sites. So of course, it is not enough, but it has to start somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And there is a question to Ida. Is the guide available also in French?
I can have a quick answer there. Unfortunately, no. Of course, it is available online, and nothing prevents people from putting it through machine translation. I'm sure something coherent will come out. I know there is also a guide at the federal level, which should be available in French, and also one from the Walloon region, which is available in French, but I think they are a bit, they are from some years ago. So some things might not be updated.
Okay, thank you very much, Ida. Now, because we are really running over time, I would suggest that we stop here with the questions. And as I said, we will collect the answer in writing by the speakers. I would like to announce that the next GPP webinar will take place on the 16th of October in the morning. We will let you know soon the precise timing, and the title of this webinar is Making an Impact, Monitoring the Outcomes of Public Procurement. And I'm sure Delfina will also post in the chat additional information. Now let's conclude with take your Slido, and there are really two questions that we would like to ask you. So Hulen, if you can please put the question on. So have you been inspired from the practices that have been presented? So 70, no. So it's moving. Okay, it seems that 50%, no, let's say 57% yes, and okay, it keeps on moving. So more or less, there is an equal views between yes and partially. Okay, we can go to the next one. What kind of support would you need to ensure better compliance with the horizontal social clause and anti-dumping clauses in your tendering procedures? And this is a word cloud poll, so try to respond with a few words. Thank you. Guidelines, training, legal certainty, guidelines, training, networking, document with specific examples, best practices examples, better understanding of legislation, legal regulation and guidance, a help desk. Yeah. Okay, but this seems to be, so guidelines, training, examples, legal certainty, legal clarity seem to be the most recurring demands. Okay, I would suggest that we can close the webinar here. I would like to thank you all for your participation, and also especially because we run 10 minutes over time. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you, I mean, most of you, on the 16th of October for the third GPP Helpdesk webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
have a nice afternoon all.